You're raised as an athlete to fight back. So why all of a sudden when you retire do you stop the good fight?
This is Finding Center with Nick Hardwick.
Hey all, it's Nick. If you follow my stories on Instagram, I'm at Nick Hardwick. Then you already know I'm very routine and regimented. I post almost every meal that I eat to show what health and maintaining a fit and active body and lifestyle, that it's not a trick. So if you're not following me, please follow me. It's consistently making good choices on a daily basis with what you put into your body and how you live and how much you move. One thing I put into my body since the company was founded in 2017 is BUBS Naturals, collagen protein, and MCT oil powder. One way or another, I have used BUBS religiously daily. Now, most mornings during the work week, I'm up and at 'em at about 4 a.m., having my pre-workout shake at 4:30. I count, as you know, all my macronutrients. I'm super specific about what I put in and at what times. And that meal specifically has 5 grams of fat, 40 grams of protein, 45 grams of carbs. Part of that drink, the tasty part anyway, is BUBS MCT oil powder. It adds such a nice little creaminess and it balances out the profile and it slows down the digestion of the protein and the carbs so I can have sustained energy at the gym at 5 a.m. And on the weekends, or really when I want to treat myself, I have either a BUBS protein latte or a matcha green tea protein. You can find those recipes on my stories. Add 20 grams of collagen protein, which I find very gentle on the stomach, and a little dose of MCT oil powder. Whip it up with the magic wand that they have. Super cool. And voila, it's just a really decadent treat. I know my body. I listen very closely to how it responds to what I put in it. And I wouldn't have stuck with BUBS through the years if my body didn't like what it was feeling. Couple of other good things. No other collagen brand can claim to be 100% NSF certified for sport, which is the official seal of approval for most all professional sports. Not that you're a professional athlete. I get that. But you know that what you're getting is what is claimed on the package with that certification. That's huge for me because a lot of products, they just can't offer that. And they stand behind their products with a 100% guarantee. You're going to love the product. It's fabulous. So that's not all going to matter, but it could be for your first time a good peace of mind. Here's something else I love about the company. They always donate 10% of BUBS to charity. The Glenn Doherty Foundation, the namesake for BUBS. You'll read up on his story. You can check that out at bubsnaturals.com. If you happen to be in the San Diego area, BUBS products are now available at all Barron's marketplaces. Stop in, pick some up today, and see how conveniently health fits into your life. If you don't have a Barron's near you or you don't want to go to the store, order it online at bubsnaturals.com. Again, you'll find recipes and their blog is really fantastic. Use the code NICK15 for 15% off. That discount only works at bubsnaturals.com, or they are also on Amazon Prime and Amazon Choice. Check them out, guys. I swear by them, bubsnaturals.com.
Hey guys, hope everybody out there is having a fabulous day. So joining us today on the Finding Center podcast is Dr. Tim Moseley. Now, if you've been with us on the Finding Center podcast from episode 1, and we're listening really closely to Dr. Doc Parsley, our Navy SEAL, sleep doctor, and endocrinologist from this season's first episode, you may remember me asking him if there's anything out there in the scientific world that he's either trying or keeping his eye on. And the one thing he mentioned that he was willing to try based on the scientific evidence was a thing called peptides. I had to go look this up, of course. According to the American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine, peptides are a newly emerging science of cell signaling amino acid sequences with regulatory and rejuvenation actions on neuroendocrine immune functionality. That's a mouthful. The specifically targeted use of peptides in an environment has the potential to rewrite bodily chemistry relationships and ultimately generate a restorative trend towards anabolism and homeostasis. Peptides can also be utilized and applied in the treatment of injuries with capabilities that help prevent chronic disease and enhance peak performance. Now, the thing that Dr. Parsley said he was going to be a late adapter on was exosomes, as he wanted to see the science emerge a little bit further in that field. If you're like me and you don't have a PhD in human biology, you may be going, what the heck is an exosome? I wrote it down as he was saying it and went and looked it up also, going down a little wormhole of information that was way over my head. Nonetheless, I was still highly intrigued, as I'm always looking for ways to kind of retroactively repair some of the damage that I have caused my body and brain playing football for a living. And this therapy seems like it may have the possibility to do some of that. Now, coincidentally, about a week after I recorded that first podcast and had my radar up for the word exosomes, I was at a friend's charity event where I ran into our guest today, Tim Moseley. Tim serves as the Chief Scientific Officer of Direct Biologics. Direct Biologics is an innovative technology company focused on developing and providing regenerative biologic products to the medical marketplace. We had a really interesting conversation at that time, and we're finally connecting to put some of this groundbreaking science out into the universe. Let's take a glimpse into what may potentially be the future of regenerative medicine. Here we go. Joining us now on the Finding Center podcast is Tim Moseley. Tim, thank you so much for the time. How are you?
Great. How are you doing?
I am fantastic. All right, before we get into the weeds on exosome therapy and what an exosome is, can you give us a little bit of a background on how you became the Chief Scientific Officer at Direct Biologics?
Sure. We have like an hour, right? So I am a stem cell biologist. I got my PhD at UC Davis in the Department of Orthopedic Surgery. My degree is in cell and developmental biology. We're working on bone and cartilage repair. At UC Davis, I managed the orthopedic research lab where we created the Center for Tissue Regeneration and Repair, which was a multi-departmental center of excellence. After many years at Davis, probably over 9 years there in that Department of Orthopedics, I left academia and went into industry. Moved down to San Diego, which is where my wife is from, so it was a very easy transition, and not a bad place to end up.
It's a great place to be, isn't it?
Right. I was working at a company doing adipose-derived stem cell. It's called stromal vascular fraction, so we were able to do liposuction from a patient, process the fat, isolate the stem cells out of that fat, and provide it back to the patient. And the goal is to have it done in about an hour. So treating a variety of different indications, using it as fillers. If there's, a lumpectomy for, breast reconstruction, you could, fill that void with the fat combined with the stem cells. There's other opportunities of cardiac applications, things like that. And so worked there managing the preclinical and clinical enabling studies. Left them, went to a spine medical device company, managed their biologics for almost 10 years, doing bone grafting, primarily for spine fusions as well as trauma, using adult stem cells, viable bone grafts, things like that, that we could deliver to the patients. A lot of clinical studies, a lot of preclinical characterization, things like that. When I left the spine medical device company, I kind of branched out on my own, partnered with a retired orthopedic surgeon. We started our own company here in San Diego in the La Costa area, and we were taking the mesenchymal stem cells and isolating the signals from those cells.
Say that word again, mesenchymal?
Mesenchymal stem cells.
And what exactly is mesenchymal? I was looking up that word as I was getting ready for this. Help me out with that.
Yeah, so these are the adult stem cells that are in every tissue of the body, and they are prepared waiting for there to be an injury. And so my whole career has been focused on that. So, with the orthopedics, we were looking at the mesenchymal cell for bone and cartilage repair. When I was at the adipose-derived company, we were doing the adipose-derived mesenchymal stem cells for a variety of different indications. At the spine medical device, we were taking the mesenchymal stem cells and trying to make bone for the fusions and for trauma repair. So this mesenchymal stem cell is everywhere. Often they're attached to blood vessels, and depending on where they've been identified from, they have different names. So, like I mentioned, the fat is the stromal vascular fraction. That's what it's called, but those are the mesenchymal stem cells there. We know they're pericytes because they're attached to perivascular tissues, bone marrow aspirate, That's pretty common in the sports injuries where a physician will take bone marrow aspirate, spin it down, and concentrate it to get the stem cells out of the bone marrow.
Is that the one they take out of the hip?
Yeah, usually it's the hip. That's the primary source. It's easy to access. But if they're doing like a big open spine surgery, they might go into the vertebra or something like that and draw it. But you need that bone marrow, the blood components that are in there, and then isolate the cells from that. So my whole career had been trying to take this mesenchymal stem cell and, in the lab, you can easily turn it into the tissue you want. So you can, in the right conditions, you can turn it into cartilage, you can turn it into fat, you can turn it into bone. But when you take that cell and put it into a patient, it's difficult to know how it's going to act. How is it going to turn into that tissue in that patient? So do you coax it to do it and then give it to the patient, or do you hope the environment is going to turn it into that tissue type when you implant it? So when we realized that, most cells that you transplant don't survive that process. They've already been
too traumatic for them.
Right. They've been traumatized by the harvest, by the purification, and then you're implanting them in, and they're an adherent cell, so they want to be attached to something. And so they're just floating around. They're going to start programming themselves to die. And so that's called apoptosis. And so it's programmed cell death. And so,
And that's happening all the time in our body anyhow.
Yeah, absolutely. When you have an injury, that damaged tissue sends out signals to other cells, and those cells all kind of like, hey, we all need to die now so we can be cleaned out and new tissue can be replaced, in that spot. And so all of that repair process is coordinated by the cells. And so, but it's not necessarily the cells themselves that are directly doing it. It's the signals that are coming from those cells. And so that was like where the light bulb came on, that, hey, if there's a way for us to collect these signals without the cells there, then that's a huge benefit, because you don't have those dying cells that you've implanted with them. Because you can provide cells and they're going to give out these regenerative signals and exosomes and growth factors, but then and you start getting that healing process, but then when a bunch of cells die, they're going to all pop open, and you have all the cell debris in the extracellular space that needs to be removed. And so now you have macrophages and other cells coming in, trying to clean out all that debris, and you've defeated this regenerative environment. Now you have this more catabolic, destructive environment happening. So
the stem cells that you were trying to put into somebody was actually creating perhaps more inflammation.
Correct.
Okay.
And so the idea we came up with, and at my company with this retired orthopedic surgeon, was that if we can grow up the cells and collect these signals provide that benefit that is the stem cell benefit without the cells. And so it's a pretty difficult process, because the growth factors in the extracellular vesicles are very fragile. They're not designed to be around the body and stay everywhere. They're kind of local signaling that the cells provide to that environment. And so we had to figure out a way to protect them once we isolated them from oxidation, from enzymatic digestion, as well as the freezing to preserve them. That freezing process can damage them as well. And so that was part of our proprietary process that we came up with as a way to protect those proteins, growth factor cytokines, as well as extracellular vesicles. And the extracellular vesicles are so exciting because they're delivering the signal to reprogram the local cells.
In these extracellular vesicles, this is the exosome.
Correct.
Okay, so in as simple a terms as you possibly can, because we're talking like the smallest of the smallest. I don't even know what you call it. Is it a particle? Is it what is it? It's a signal. What is it in the body? Is it, and how small relative to everything else is this?
So I guess as a cell biologist, it makes total sense to me.
Okay.
Does that help you?
Yes.
So a normal mesenchymal type cell, whether it's a fibroblast or just a normal somatic cell, is going to be around 30 microns in size. A blood cell is 10 microns,
okay.
10 or 11 microns. An exosome is 30 nanometers. So a thousandth the size
yes.
of a cell. And so they're between 30 and 150 nanometers, but the advantage of this is that they're so tiny that they can go everywhere. It's also a risk, right? So we know that, if these were delivered, systemically to the body, they can go everywhere in the body. They are a mesenchymal stem cell signal. So the fact that they're coming from the mesenchymal stem cell, they're going to have the same surface receptors on the outside of them. They have a lipid bilayer that's the same surface lipids that a cell has on the outside of the cell. It has transmembrane proteins. It has cholesterol in the membrane of the cell, just like a normal cell would have. But instead of having the DNA and the nucleus inside it and all the organelles, this has messenger RNA and microRNA and some cytoplasmic proteins in it. And the exciting thing about that is that these signals are responding to that. They're produced by the stem cell to signal other cells what to do. And so what the idea is that, let's say we have an injury and we need to repair that. Well, the local cells that are going to be spitting out these signals to reduce inflammation, stimulate new blood vessel formation or angiogenesis. We need to restore the matrix, so we're going to produce more extracellular matrix proteins, which might be collagen and proteoglycans and other things that are in that extracellular space.
Now, what do you mean by matrix?
The environment for the cells to live in.
Okay.
Or the tissue.
Gotcha.
Right? So you have cells, but you have all the connective tissue between the cells, which is your extracellular matrix. That's collagens, laminin, fibronectin. Then you have all your proteoglycans, chondroitin sulfate and keratin sulfate, and these different things, as well as hyaluronic acid, which most athletes, or people with osteoarthritis might have had a hyaluronic acid injection into their joint because it holds a lot of water and it helps to re-lubricate. And that's kind of the intention of it is, hey, we'll put this hyaluronic acid sugar protein or sugar in your body that will suck up a lot of water and help in that lubrication.
You mentioned that exosomes don't carry the DNA, and reading up on this, what's the dangers of, like, stem cells carry DNA with them?
Correct.
So what would be the dangers of introducing DNA into the body?
So if it's your own DNA, there's no risk associated, right? Because, I mean, if you're delivering foreign cells, let's say you have an embryonic cell or a fetal cell or somebody else's cell, the mesenchymal stem cell is not seen as a foreign cell. It doesn't have these surface markers on the outside that the cell, your body would detect it as foreign, but it is somebody else's DNA. So now if it does integrate into your tissue and starts growing, now you have somebody else's DNA in there. And so there could be a cancer gene or something else that you've just introduced in there that's foreign. Majority of those cells are going to die, so that's not a huge risk. But if some do survive and they start growing, then you're essentially a chimera, which means you have two different sets of DNA in your body, and that's kind of the risk. That you don't necessarily want. That's not a good idea.
Sure.
And that's kind of why moving away from allogeneic stem cell therapy is probably the better way to go.
So, and kind of listening to you, talking through your history working with stem cells and now moving on to exosomes, was it a little bit of frustration working with the stem cells that when this kind of light bulb clicked off that it's like, no, we want to be working with the signaling process more than we do the actual stem cells because of how many of them die off? And was it kind of a lack of productivity out of the stem cells that led you more towards this?
Yeah, there was kind of an unknown outcome. So, we were doing bone fusions, and it's like, oh, how is it sometimes working and sometimes not working? Maybe more often than not it worked, but is it the cells that were having the effect, or was it just the environment? Did the surgeon do a really good job preparing the environment for the bone graft to be in that it would have healed with or without the cells?
Regardless.
Right. So now how do you study that? I mean, do we, put in dead bone versus live bone and see what effect it has? And so it was just, we weren't in that position to do those studies at that time. So my company that I had, and getting back to your original question about how I got to where I am.
Yeah.
So go off on a tangent.
No, that's great.
So my company was acquired a little over a year ago by Direct Biologics. Their corporate headquarters is located right now in St. Louis, with the shipping and distribution center located there. They acquired my company, our associated IP that was about the exosomes and their indications and the protection of the growth factors and exosomes associated with that. And I came over as their chief scientific officer and owner of Direct Biologics as well. And so since then, we've scaled up. Because we had the funding behind Direct Biologics, we were able to scale up our manufacturing from a preclinical process to a drug therapeutic level. So, the cells are thoroughly characterized and understood and registered with the FDA with a master record on file with them. Our media is chemically defined, no animal products in the facilities or anything like that. All of our processes are done in a drug therapeutic manufacturing facility where every process is validated, every piece of equipment is, preventative maintenance records and staff training and regulatory and quality. And so it's just an amazing amount of paperwork for each run that you do.
Oh, I can imagine.
It's like a book, and it's like, wow, well, that was easy. Let's do it again. So, but I mean, that's really important having validated processes and knowing that every vial that you have has got the same identical product in there, because as a tissue product, there's a lot of variability in the tissue industry, right?
I would say that's got to be pretty rare in that industry.
It's rare to have this type of quality reproducibility in that. And, most tissue products have to meet this American Association of Tissue Banks, or AATB standards, which are good. It's, make sure that you're procuring the tissue from a reputable spot, place. That came out of like the gravedigger issues. And so now it's coming from a, legitimate, recognized tissue bank processes, donated bodies or whatever. And then isolating the tissue, making sure that you're not introducing anything into it, that it's all the donor screening is done right and all this. So that's the American Association of Tissue Banks has set these whole standards up that tissue banks need to adhere to. Well, if you talk about drug manufacturing, that's at a much higher level, right? Because you've got more chemistry and more processes that are involved in manufacturing and processing and packaging and stuff like that. And so that's where we decided to take our process and push it up into that level,
into a higher threshold of clearance.
Yeah, and that's where that tremendous amount of paperwork and regulatory oversight and things like that.
Is it treated as a drug?
No, so it's still considered a tissue product, but our processes are at that level because the FDA has actually not come out and made a statement of guidance for industry on what exosomes are.
Do you imagine they're going to soon?
Yeah, I think so. There's a lot of the FDA is really cracking down on the stem cell companies, and for good reason. There's a lot of these fly-by-night companies as well as physicians that are saying, use these stem cells to treat this disease. And as soon as you're saying to use it to treat a disease, it falls into that drug category.
It's the specific disease.
Right.
Yeah, when you go direct indication, this is okay.
Correct. Yeah. Whether it's use stem cells to treat osteoarthritis. Well, you've just said to treat osteoarthritis, which makes it a drug. And if it hasn't gone the drug pathway, which everybody knows is hugely time consuming, hugely expensive, and then you have to make sure that your cells that you're delivering are characterized. And so it might be every single time you grow up the cells, you have a different population, or they act a little bit differently or something like that. And so that's where you have these companies doing these huge stem cell studies. And I think the biggest one was Osiris Therapeutics started off with that, but then Mesoblast, an Australian company, kind of took that over and bought a lot of that technology from Osiris. And they were doing tremendous clinical trials at a drug level with their cells, which were mesenchymal stem cells, and trying different therapies with those cells as a drug. But you're talking 7-10 years of processes, right, where if someone's doing a minimally manipulated tissue product, they can just jump right onto the market. And so there's a lot of people that are like,
that's kind of the Wild West.
Exactly.
That's like the supplementation world of the
yeah, exactly. We're going to
the higher level of the supplementation world.
Right, we're going to go to there's that one aisle at the grocery store. It's like, wait, what is that?
Exactly. So where is your company? Where's the scientific community on the understanding of how exosomes work in the body?
Yeah, so there's a tremendous amount of preclinical research, academic research on understanding what exosomes are and what they can be used for.
When were they discovered? First off, exosome,
yeah, quite a few years ago.
Okay.
It came out of the cancer research because they were wondering, why do cancer cells? How do they communicate with each other? How do they signal? Hey, we should metastasize. And when you go and you look at research on exosomes, and 80-90% of the papers out there are about cancer spreading because of exosomes. You go, whoa, wait a minute. I don't want to give cancer with exosome therapies, right? But it really comes down to what is the cell source. Cancer cells produce cancer exosomes.
Okay.
You've got, exosomes everywhere in the body. Every body fluid has exosomes in it. That's your normal cell's way of communicating. And so the idea is that by taking this regenerative cell of the body, the mesenchymal stem cell, and collecting the signals that it produces as a normal process of wound healing, then we have those appropriate signals for that wound healing. We've also identified in our process that, we have probably 10 different tumor suppressor proteins associated with it. So there's kind of, you're thinking, hey, we have angiogenic signal. So if it signaled to a tumor, it would vascularize that tumor or get it to grow. But we also have these tumor suppressor proteins. And so I think our bodies are always fighting cancer. We have probably little tumors that are growing, and our immune system recognizes it and attacks it. Right, and our immune system recognizes it and attacks it, and it goes away. It's when we have a impaired immune system or a chronic inflammation in our bodies that it goes without detection, and then you can get these growths that all of a sudden it's out of control. How did that show up? And so I think there's a huge opportunity in reducing inflammation in the body to let your body recognize and identify things like that.
Hey guys, Hardwick here. Breaking news. This important PSA public service announcement is brought to you by Manscaped.com. They got a brand new trimmer. It's the best on the market. It's their third generation. It's the Lawnmower 3.0 manscaping trimmer. It's now available for purchase. It's the leading cutting-edge ceramic blade to prevent manscaping accidents. Nobody wants one of those. Millions of balls are about to be nick-free thanks to Manscaped's advanced skin-safe technology. By the way, Valentine's Day is coming up, so it might be a great opportunity to get yourself a gift, or if you are a spouse of somebody who needs some manscaping, maybe a great opportunity to get one of those. Get 20% off and free shipping with the code BELIEVE, BLEAV, at manscaped.com. That's 20% off with free shipping at manscaped.com. Use the code BLEAV. And as always, your balls will thank you. How are these harvested? Or cultivated, or I don't even know the correct word to use.
Right.
How were they collected?
So it's a normal soluble signal that cells use to communicate with each other. So the cells will make the exosomes inside the cell and then spit the exosomes out. When they were originally identified, they thought that they were waste products. That's how the cell's getting rid of unwanted, messenger RNA or microRNA. Cell debris, things like that. It would just be like, oh, we're spitting all of these things out, these signals out of the cell. But, we identified later that, these are cell signals that are this cell that's making them is signaling the local cells in its environment to reprogram them. And, you're saying reprogram them. What does that mean? Well, the normal process of a cell is that, growth factor will bind to that cell surface receptor for that growth factor, and it starts this whole cascade to make a new protein or tell the cell to do something. Do we need to grow? Do we need to divide? Do we need to move? Do we need to signal other cells in that environment? And so these messenger RNA and microRNA, the messenger RNA is like an on switch to a cell to start making protein.
Okay.
MicroRNA is a small snippet of reverse messenger RNA. And so it'll shut down a pathway for protein production. And so it's like the off switch.
Okay.
And so these exosomes will have on switches and off switches in them, and it'll go to your local cells and say, hey, turn on this mechanism. And what is it? Make more extracellular matrix, make more blood vessels. We need other cells to come in here and help us heal it. We need to shut down inflammation. And I mean, inflammation is kind of a weird word because it really means just the recruitment of cells coming in there into the environment. So you can have...
Yeah, we hear inflammation now, and everybody freaks out. It's like inflammation's bad, but...
Well, in essence it is.
Yes.
But revascularization and angiogenesis is an inflammatory process. It's part of a normal wound healing. The problem is if it's continuous and it's ongoing, that turns into this chronic inflammation, which is very destructive. And that causes a catabolic environment that will start breaking down the tissues, breaking down the cells, damaging them. And that's kind of where degenerative joint disease, you get this cascade of destruction in the cartilage, and you get, fraying cartilage, and that's stimulating other things. And then you get these, cytokines that are just kind of breaking down things and stressing the cells, and then the cells are dying and they're popping. So you kind of get this, cycle that's self-perpetuating itself. And if you can shut that down, which is kind of the whole idea behind like a cortisone shot, is you reduce this inflammation.
Just come in and hammer the inflammation hard.
Right. And then hopefully the body will kind of reset itself and be like, oh, now we're happy. But if there's some underlying issue going on, you're going to give it a cortisone shot and it doesn't help it, it's probably not a good idea to go give it another cortisone shot, because now you're starting to, because we know that the cortisones and the steroids start breaking down cartilage and stuff like that. And so it's not a great thing to have multiple treatments of that. If the first one didn't work, it's like, okay, now we got to look for something else.
Okay.
No, just keep hammering it over and over again with the same thing.
Sure.
And
I probably had too many of those in my playing career.
I'm sure. It's pretty common.
Yeah, it's like, get back on the field. I need something in this knee quickly.
Right. And it is a quick response.
It is a quick fix, yeah.
The idea is that, if you have a sports injury, is different from somebody who has a chronic degenerative disease. But most athletes, after a hard sport, will go on to develop more degenerative because they've had so many injuries and things like that. And maybe it wasn't painful when you're 25 or 35, but by the time you get to 45, 50, all of a sudden you're like, hey, my ankles hurt, my knees hurt, I don't want to get up out of my chair.
Yeah, it really starts to stack up on you.
Right. And so that's kind of that degenerative injury, which the goal is to, how can we restore that cartilage? How can we reduce that inflammation that's in there in a more regenerative environment? And so that's where the preclinical evidence starts coming into play, where you can create an animal model of osteoarthritis, and then we can treat them with exosomes. We can create different types of exosomes, right? Because exosomes
different exosomes for different indications.
Yeah, ideally, yeah. That's the future, right? That's what we're hoping to go to.
All exosomes in the body are not the same.
Correct.
Okay.
I mean, getting back to like the cancer ones, right? I mean, we know that cancer exosomes are bad. We don't want cancer exosomes. But they're found in every body fluid. So, there are waste products, right? So urine has exosomes in it. So are those exosomes good signals or bad signals? I don't know how many people, if anybody's even looked into it, right?
Okay, sure.
Because they were thinking, okay, if it's a waste product, it's probably bad. It's not going to be our therapy of choice. We're not going to go into some doctor's office and say, hey, we got urine exosomes for you.
Yeah. Good luck with that sale.
Exactly.
So are there cartilage exosomes, bone exosomes, brain exosomes?
Probably. Right now we're isolating them from fluids, so saliva, blood, amniotic fluid, milk, urine. There's exosomes in all of those because that's the normal way of cell signaling, and maybe getting rid of waste products. And so the idea is that if you can identify the cell that's making the exosomes and control that environment that cell sees, you can control what exosomes are made. And so that was the approach that we took, that we said, hey, if we can stimulate our stem cells in the right way, they're going to produce this wound healing regenerative signals that we can collect and protect and freeze. And so now it's a general wound healing regenerative signal. Now, is there something that's better for hair regeneration? Probably. Is there something better for osteoarthritic pain? Yeah, probably. Is there something that could help with degenerative brain disorders, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, things like that? Probably. But is this the ideal one? Probably not ideal. It's probably not the optimized for each of those different indications, but having a general anti-inflammatory regenerative signal can have a benefit in all of these different things, because
it's still effective.
Exactly. We're not delivering the cells. So we're not trying to get cells to turn into that environment, into that tissue type. We're going to reprogram the local cells. And so that's why, the aesthetics is really an easy home run, because
aesthetics like hair, skin.
Yeah, things that you're going to see right off the bat.
Like the immediate aging process. Yeah.
Yeah. And so hair loss, the female alopecia is tremendous opportunity for this, because what we're doing is we're going to turn on the dermal papilla, the hair follicle, and activate it to start producing more hair. And it's going to produce more thicker, naturally colored hair, because the melanocyte's also going to be affected in there, and that's the cell that produces the hair color. Is exciting, and we're seeing evidence of that.
You mentioned clinic. Women. Is it also effective for men?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like male pattern baldness.
Yeah, and so right now the current kind of standard of care is the physician will take your blood, spin it down, isolate your platelet-rich plasma, or PRP.
PRP. A lot of people have heard of that and probably had that treatment.
Exactly. Yeah. And come back in 3 months and have it done again, and then 6 months and 9 months, have it repeated, and you might start seeing some peach fuzz. You might get some hair growth, but don't expect anything maybe for a year. And what we're seeing with the exosome treatment by some of the top physicians, top hair guys in the world, is 5 weeks. You start seeing significant hair growth.
No kidding.
And it's a single treatment. It's not.
Sign me up. It's a single treatment?
Yeah, single treatment. And you don't have to keep coming back. And so now, people are like, well, exosomes are kind of expensive, but it's a one and done type thing. Now, if there's some underlying issue that's causing the hair loss, some hormonal issues or something like that, it's going to come back. It's not one and done forever.
Okay.
But we don't know how long it's going to last, right?
But like standard male pattern baldness without any underlying hormonal issues, it could be effective, and don't know.
Right. And that's where we're in the process of collecting that data. There was a big international hair surgeons conference in Bangkok about a week ago. And we had 5 different surgeons or physicians, hair surgeons, that had used our product and presented at that conference on their success. And they are
really good reviews from them.
Yeah, they're blown away. Some of the top guys in the world didn't believe it at first until they used it, and then they're like, well, if I didn't see it with my own eyes, I wouldn't have believed the results that we're seeing with this. And so, that's just one aspect, right? That's hair.
That's hair.
We're seeing that same type of thing with, the skin, the anti-aging of the skin. And then we've initiated this, a study. It was a physician-led study. It's under IRB, which is an institutional review board, which maybe I should go into a little bit. So there's different types of clinical studies you can do. But if you're going to collect patient data and have patients coming back, you're doing research. And so in order to do research, you can't just do uncontrolled human research. And so, which it's weird to say it out loud like that, but that's exactly what it is. Even if you're just following your patients, if you're collecting follow-up data and the idea you want to publish it, that requires this oversight. And so an institutional review board, some big hospital systems will have their own IRB. There's also some nationally recognized companies that's what they do, and they evaluate the proposal, like what patients, what's the inclusion exclusion criteria, what are you treating, what are you treating them with, what's the safety profile of that, how do you know, what are you going to do to trace adverse events, what are your outcomes that you're looking for, and then they go and evaluate it. What is this, is this safe? Are we going to be causing some harm to these patients? And after they evaluate everything, then they will approve that study to go.
Okay.
And then they can register it with the FDA to say, hey, here's a clinical trial being done with this under IRB for this indication. And so we just initiated one this month, or in the month of November, We treated 30 combat injured Navy SEALs with a direct knee injection of the exosomes undiluted, 2 cc's per joint, up to 4 joints.
Okay.
So it's kind of funny because we weren't
Good
really.
for them.
Yeah, exactly.
Can I be a part of this study?
Yeah, we had a lot of them come out of the woodworks afterwards, like, "Hey, how about me? I didn't hear about this until after it was a fact." But yeah,
They're like, "You sure you only want 30?"
It's a tight community.
Yes.
As everybody probably is aware. And they harsh on each other pretty well. Are you SEAL Team 6 or are you SEAL Team 5? Are you only SEAL Team 1? That type of stuff, right? We know they're all.
No offense to the SEAL Team 1 guys out there listening.
Exactly. That wasn't me saying that. I was just paraphrasing.
We love you too.
Exactly. But the initial part of that study was safety. Were there any adverse events? And we followed them out for the first, 48 hours for that, but also we're continuing to follow them. But there were no adverse events identified. We did all of the pain.
None expected either, I would imagine.
No, absolutely not. These are naturally occurring signals, so it's not like
it's not like histamine or anything like that.
Right, we're not creating some, huge dose. This is a natural number that cells are making. We're not concentrating them, so it's nothing abnormal, and so it's natural.
One sec, just one general question about exosomes. Like in a body, is there a given number of exosomes? Like, do you come into the world, the planet, do you come into Earth here with like a set number? Do they grow?
Right. No, that's a really good question. So, no, there's not a set number.
Okay.
So a cell, can produce a really low number if it's just resting. There's kind of a maintenance signaling that's going on versus if there's damage or trauma that it's seeing, that it's going to start producing a tremendous number.
Then there's a lot of activity.
Yeah, and so depending on the environment that the cell is in and what it needs to do, it's going to signal that. And then the cells themselves can make as much as they need. So if there's, you break your arm and then 6 months later you break your leg, it's going to start this whole healing cascade over again. It's not like, well, you spin everything on your arm, so now I'm not going to repair your leg. Your body responds to that injury, and that's the cells. And so, your body will make billions of exosomes
if it needs to.
Yeah, and every day there's probably billions of exosomes in your body that are involved in some signaling that are going around, maybe trillions. And so it's just really it's the way cells communicate with each other.
You mentioned with the Navy SEAL trial that you guys are doing, the 2 cc injection into the knees. How else are these being administered? So in the joints, obviously doing a direct injection. Muscle trauma, direct injection, anything with the brain, other body parts, I don't know, vision, skin, hair,
So I'm limited a little bit because I work for the company, and so I can't be promoting it for specific drug indications, as we kind of talked about earlier.
Right.
But there are physicians that are using this product a variety of different ways, kind of outside the box, and it's surprising to us. But
how creative they're getting?
Sure. Because there's a lot of people that truly believe in stem cell treatments, and with the FDA kind of cracking down on stem cells and not being able to deliver, or have sterile cells, your, aseptic cells are okay. That's what you do, but you can't sterilize them or you kill them.
They die.
Right. And so, but everybody understands that there is a benefit with these regenerative cells, providing them into that environment and healing environment. And so the way that exosome signaling happens is we remove the cells from that process and we're just delivering the signals. And so, being able to sterile filter the exosomes is huge because now a physician can use it how they feel is best for their patient. The FDA regulates these as a 361 tissue product, which means it's minimally manipulated for homologous use. There's no cells in the process and things. There's several regulations that puts us in our situation. But physicians are not regulated by the FDA. Their practice of medicine is not regulated. So they can choose how they want to use a product to treat their patient. If they understand the science and they understand what they're trying to achieve with this, they can choose it however they want. So like you mentioned, there are physicians treating, thigh contusions, osteoarthritis, spine issues. There's guys that are injecting SI joint, facet joints, interdiscal injections. But it's all surgeon determined. And, you and I talked even before this thing started about neurodegenerative diseases and the opportunity with there, because the preclinical evidence on exosomes is that they can stimulate neurite outgrowth. And so you can only imagine that the opportunities there, that if we can deliver them, that, there is an opportunity for regenerating nerve injuries and brain injuries. And so, we have guys
and it's obviously so small that no issues crossing the blood-brain barrier.
Yeah, and that's good and bad, right? There's a risk there associated with it, which is why having it manufactured at this drug therapeutic level is very important, because if a physician says, I think it's best if we treat this patient this way, you're not worrying about, encephalitis or some type of an infection because you delivered something that wasn't sterile. And that's where the cell therapy, my previous career, we were treating cardiac issues, AMIs, acute myocardial infarcts, with stem cells. And so the whole idea is that, you have a AMI, and the doctor says, okay, we're going to have to put a stent in to open up this blood vessel. And so they go, track up into your heart and put a stent there. And then we're like, hey, we'll deliver the stem cells, and those will go in and repair that damaged heart tissue. Well, we found out that the cells went right past the stent. Maybe there's some benefit to that heart tissue, but they all went right to the lungs and got trapped in the lungs. And we're like, well,
how did you track them?
There's a variety of different ways that you can do it. There's some tiny metal magnetic beads you can put in the cells. Okay. There's fluorescent markers you can put in there. And a lot of it is animal study stuff where you can, radioactively label the cells and try where they go and see what organ's radioactive after the fact. So there's a lot of different ways of doing it. And there's always some new, really cool technique. Yes. Especially as a cell biologist, I'm like, ooh, I haven't tried that one before.
That looks fun.
Yeah, that looks really cool. And there's one that came out when, several years ago now, that you hit these proteins with a certain wavelength of light and they fluoresce. And so you could take an animal model and deliver the cells, and then you can put this animal on a giant, like a scanner, and you can scan it, and those cells will fluoresce, and you can see exactly where they are in the animal without having to dissect the animal or kill the animal. So now you can do like time studies, like, hey, where do they go immediately? Where do they go in, 6 hours, 12 hours, 24 hours, 48 hours until they're gone? And so there's a lot of things like that you can track the cells over time. But what happened was, you place a stent in a heart, and 90% of the patients get better because you've now opened up that blood vessel and now blood's flowing again. So in order to see what benefit the cells had, you had to do a tremendous number of patients to show, hey, now we're 95% better instead of just 90% better.
Okay.
And I can't remember the exact numbers, but let's say we had to do 300 patients to do this. And so you're going to have multiple centers and hoping everybody's doing it the same way. And then the stents that they put in, they have these drug-eluting stents, and they have bare metal stents. And so the drug-eluting stents have drugs on there to prevent cells from dividing. And the reason why is you don't want the blood vessels to grow back over the stent and occlude the vessel again.
Okay.
And so they put these drug-eluting stents on there. It prevents the blood vessel from growing over, but it'll also stop stem cells from dividing. And so you've delivered cells to these drug-eluting stents, hoping to do cell therapy. It's not going to be beneficial. So
it's just going to skate right by it.
Right. And so then it's like, okay, now we have to, this 300 patient clinical study probably needs to be 600 because we're only going to really look at the bare metal stent patients. And so now this has gone to this enormous clinical study that multiple centers and trying to collect all that data and figure out that, did we get a 5% better outcome is really difficult. But we found out that these patients, that the cells got trapped in the lungs, their COPD symptoms went away. And so we're like,
no kidding.
Yeah, what's happening? How is that happening? Well, the cells are getting trapped in the lung and reducing their cases of COPD. And so now we're thinking, hey, is there an opportunity with exosomes to treat COPD? Because we know that stem cells themselves can do that when they're delivered intravenously and they get trapped in the lung. So now is there a way to deliver exosomes to the lung that same way? Or is there a way to inhale the exosomes
That's
and
what I was going to
have it come
ask.
from the other side?
How can you ensure that it goes to the location? Is there a way yet to track exosomes?
No, I mean
they're so small.
First of all, they're so small, but also your body's producing exosomes all the time. So now, how do you know what exosomes you delivered, which ones versus which ones are naturally in your body? And there's animal studies you can do with that. So there was a study where, they created a wound on the back of a rat. And sorry for all the animal rights people or activists there, but medical research is necessary. But they took fluorescently labeled mesenchymal stem cell exosomes and injected them into the tail vein. And the idea was to find out, do they home to a site of injury?
Okay.
And then do they deliver their fluorescent signal to those cells in that environment? And they found that they did. They tracked to that wound. They delivered their signal to the dermal fibroblasts, and they were able to detect that signal out for 3 weeks. And I think that signaling was probably still going on there, but the fluorescent signal didn't last longer than that. And then in that same study, they have it's called a scratch test, where they grow fibroblasts, covering a dish, and they put a scratch on it that's a known width. And then they treat them with different drugs or exosomes, for this example, and see how quickly it heals. And that was a dose response. So the more exosomes they added, the faster that scratch healed. And so compared to their controls and stuff like that. So it's pretty exciting that not only do they home to the site of injury, but they sped up that healing response.
So if somebody were to have these administered on them, say for a knee, but they also had a hip, or they had potentially a brain issue, that it could potentially escort them wherever? Or is it because it's dose dependent that there's only so many of them administered at a time that it may stay more localized?
That's unknown. I mean, the whole idea is that this is going to be a local signal.
Okay.
But, if it gets into the bloodstream and there's signals in the body that are saying, hey, here's an inflammation site, we need these signals here. The same thing with the stem cell. If you deliver it, it's going to home to that site of injury if it can get there. And so,
are doctors administering these intravenously at all?
Yeah, there are a few. And again, this is not a drug product; it's a tissue product.
Okay.
And so, there's a lot of guys that are treating a variety of different issues. Kind of a systemic rejuvenation for some. Other ones are kind of an anti-aging opportunity. Some people have received it intravenously and shown that their arthritic joints don't hurt as bad. So it's a kind of a systemic anti-inflammatory effect, but also those regenerative signals as well.
So when I hear anti-aging, as an old football player, of course, I go performance-enhancing drug, right?
Right.
And it's not a drug.
No.
I guess asking about this because the upside seems so tremendous and the downside seems really small. Before we get to like a question on players and performance and longevity, you're seeing quarterbacks now into their 40s,
right,
which is just astounding. We never have seen them perform at the level that they are now. Before we get to that, what about downsides and potential risk? I mean, you mentioned if it's not filtered and the process that you guys use and you don't know where it comes from, that potentially you're introducing something bad into the body.
Right.
Anything else?
Well, so, I mean, again, they're pretty powerful cell signals. And so that source of the exosome is really important. You don't want to be stimulating some unknown cancer in your body and things like that. If you have, really bad vascular disease, you're compromised with your vasculature, it's going to be very difficult to know how that's going to affect that patient. So there are some, minor contraindications, but so far as we've seen it, there's been we've probably treated over 5,000 patients so far in a variety of different indications. And like I said, every physician has his idea of what is going to be best for their patients with this. It's a pretty exciting point to be right now.
Back to sports, athletics. I always look at it through the football lens.
Right.
To your knowledge, have any professional athletes been using exosomes, and how long, if so?
Yeah, actually quite a few. We've actually been talking with the NFL Players Association, NFL Players Alumni Association with this. And then, there's several current players that have received our exosomes. And they're pretty excited because, that week turnaround, or sometimes a short week turnaround is
the 4 days. Thursday night football is brutal.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, it's brutal.
So yeah, those quick turnarounds are, difficult. And so if you can have this anti-inflammatory, especially, let's say a thigh contusion or an ankle injury or something like that, you can reduce that inflammation and start that healing process faster, boost it. The professional athlete is at peak performance.
Yeah.
So it's not like,
hopefully.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Until they're injured, right?
Up until like week 1 of training camp. And
Right.
then you're not at peak performance any longer.
Well, and so that's the other question is if we don't know how long these signals heal the patient. So,
Okay.
if we have a healing effect, is it, 6 months, a year down the line? And so far for, some hair patients, it's been one and done out to a year so far. So we're excited about that. We don't know about, the athlete that, maybe I had my ankle and I'm great for the next week. Well, I'm going to go out and perform again on Sunday, and now my ankle's hurt again.
You're doing it all over
Right.
again.
Is it like, well, did it only last a week, or was it your injury that, was there underlying injury, or did you re-injure it or something like that? So I don't think, these exosomes, when you treat the patient, they're not going to be around very long. They're going to be around for, maybe a few days, maybe a week, but I would be surprised if it's around more than 3 days. They're going to go to some site and they're going to deliver their cargo, which is going to be this messenger or microRNA, and reprogram those cells to shut down chronic inflammation, turn on regenerative signals, and start recruiting other cells to that site or whatever. That can be a permanent change, right? The cells have all of a sudden stopped this inflammation and started a regenerative environment, and they're happy now, and they're no longer in this chronic. That might be all they needed.
They might have went to the circuit breaker and
Exactly.
hit the switch.
Exactly, and just switched what they were doing. So the animal studies with the cartilage have showed that it's going to reduce cartilage breakdown. We know we're delivering these collagenase inhibitors. So collagenase is an enzyme that breaks down collagen. So as you get older, you lose collagen in your skin, which causes a little bit of sagging. You lose that matrix.
Yes.
You lose the hydration, and so you lose that volume. And so that's when go to the plastic surgeon. Like, let's pull back on the back of your head and tighten it up there, right? And so you see those kind of the older Hollywood actresses that look like Skeletor kind of, because they've had the skin pulled tightly over their skull. And it's not the sagging skin, it's the lack of volume that's causing the sagging skin. So if you can plump up the skin, then you're going to have a youthful glow to you. And so that's the idea, is that if we can prevent collagenase breakdown, stimulate collagen and proteoglycan production, we're going to restore that matrix, and then the proteoglycans will rehydrate. They hold on to the water. And so now you have a more healthy looking skin, maybe reduced wrinkles.
Is this becoming more common, and how are doctors administering it for the face?
So
I guess you should be concerned with the neck too, right? Not you particularly,
right,
but like
right.
people.
That's why I have a beard.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I see my neck and what it's turning into. It's like, tell me more about this.
Yeah. So there's the clinical use for this is done by plastic surgeons or dermatologists, where they will treat patients with, it's called a vampire facelift or microneedling. And the idea is they'll put this, sometimes with hyaluronic acid, sometimes different things they can put on the skin, PRP sometimes, and then they use these microneedles that just poke it into the skin, or they make channels for it to go in, penetrate the skin. And that's the whole idea with microneedling. With the exosomes, it's treated the same way. They'll just drip it on topically, and then they will either have channels created by the microneedles or microneedle it in after the fact. And the whole idea is you're getting it into those dermal fibroblasts and to activate them.
You mentioned the NFLPA. You guys are in talks with the Players Association.
Me personally.
Not you personally, but it's really it is really interesting, because obviously the NFLPA is always concerned about their players' health and their future and their longevity of their career.
Absolutely.
But have also always been, and rightfully so opposed to steroids and HGH and because that's the escalation of arms, right? Like one guy gets on it, and then the guy across from him's like, well, he's cheating, so I have to cheat too. And then it kind of becomes this out of control monster. So they are, I guess, what's the dialogue like with the NFLPA, and what's that process?
Yeah, so it's really interesting is that this is natural signaling. This is not some abnormal concentrated thing. This is what your body normally
This is not a
signals.
hormone.
Correct. And so, you hear about, oh, you can't use growth hormone, you can't use these other things. Well, there might be, you draw your blood, you're going to probably be able to see that you have growth hormone in your blood. But it's not at this level of performance enhancing.
Right.
And, maybe it reduces as you age and get older and stuff. But this might have some in there, but it's at a normal level. It's not at some, recombinant level. We're going to give you a milligram of this growth hormone. These are all in, picogram levels, which are normal production. So it's not like a doping thing. This is a natural regenerative signals that we're just giving the boost of the stem cells without the cells.
Okay. And so what's the conversation? Are they talking to their players about this therapy?
Yeah, so a few. So it's interesting because so far, I guess a lot of it's been going through like the agents say, hey, I heard about this. Could it help my player? And then we talk to them about the advantages and disadvantages. And then they're like, well, how soon can we get it? And we're like, well, we ship it overnight, FedEx, wherever it needs to be. So tomorrow you can have it.
Yeah.
But then they get it to the physician who is treating the patient, and they're like, wait a minute, what is this? It's a tissue product. What is the safety profile? What am I giving my patient? Because I don't want to be on the headline news that I injured this peak performance athlete. And so that's where us having our process records, our quality control standards, our characterization and safety profile of that, we can provide that to the physicians to where they can make an informed decision. And then we step out of it and did they use it? Did they not use it? We don't know. And then after the fact, they're like, you hear the player say, hey, I want to get that again. It told me last week. And I'm like, oh, he used it.
They enjoyed it. Yes.
So yeah, the idea is that, if we can partner with the NFL Players Association or Alumni Association that, we can provide a product to them that is beneficial to their players or their members. And so that's, I'm the scientist, so I make sure that it's what it is, it's safe and it's manufactured properly and that we understand what it is and how it's working. When it starts getting to the business side, I hear snippets here and there.
Yes.
And I'm often called into those calls to explain it to the physician or explain it to the agent.
Because I'm sure the agents have never heard of it.
Correct.
And
the players
are they concerned? Are the agents, do they get concerned with I don't want to call it the safety of it, but they don't want their players showing up and being on the news for taking something. Would they hear?
Right, and that's where that has come up about the performance enhancing stuff, because there's our hormones and stuff like that are on the do not.
Oh yes.
No fly list or whatever.
Yeah.
So that's where we had to make sure we translated what our characterization does, because part of the characterization is beyond the cells, because the cells are just the manufacturer. We have the cells making the exosomes for us. Then we have to characterize the exosomes. Most people in high school or whatever have looked through a microscope and seen a cell. Well, these exosomes are 1,000th the size of a cell. And how do you count that? How do you characterize that? And so part of it is analyzing, which we use a machine that is a particle analyzer. So it looks at every single particle that's there. And so some of those particles could be proteins, could be growth factors, might not necessarily be exosomes. And so you have to do not only light characterization, but then we fluorescently label those exosomes, then we count them again. And so, out of the total particles, these are the fluorescent ones, and this is how many we have in there. And then we also look at the growth factors. What growth factors do we have in there? And there's assays that you can actually quantify over 1,000 different growth factors and cytokines. And so that's part of our analysis release criteria, is knowing, how much of our growth factors do we have in there? How many exosomes do we have? What's the size of the exosomes? I mean, are they right? Because when cells die, they pop open and they form what are called cell bodies, which look like exosomes, but they're probably 10 times bigger than an exosome. And so knowing that, hey, our profile is the 30 to 150 nanometers, very clean peaks, we don't have cell bodies and other things in there that are getting in the way. And so
it sounds like, as far as this particular therapy and treatment, you just landed on the moon. Like, and there's a whole nother world that's still yet to come, and like the refinement of it all.
Yeah.
And being able to understand which exosomes to be administered in which way. And I guess a lot of it's just going to come with time and doctors administering it the way they do over the years and figuring out kind of anecdotally and through the other research process that what works.
Right. And so that's where our R&D facility that we just opened here in San Diego as part of the UC San Diego campus is that we are looking at, if we take the cells and we tease them a certain way, can we change that profile of exosomes? Because, right now, if you say, hey, we have 1,000 growth factors, and I can rattle off probably 100, what is the right ratio for treating osteoarthritic knee pain? What is the optimal, collection of those that would be good for hair restoration or for skin or for some neurodegenerative, neuropathy or something like that? Nobody knows. They all say, well, VEGF is good because that helps stimulate blood vessel formation. Well, EGF is good because it does this. But those ratios, when you have 1,000 different ones, it's like a symphony that's come together, and it's playing beautiful music, but it might not be the right music that it's playing for that indication. And so that's part of what our development lab is working
kind
at.
of next.
Yeah, we're trying to figure out, what is the right profile for cartilage repair? What is the right profile for hair growth? What is the right and then we can start creating different formulations that are focused towards those indications.
Oh, so awesome. So, I mean, so many different indications that this could
it's
work
almost
for.
Unlimited. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and across like the entire span, kids, adults, older folks.
Absolutely.
Where can people learn more?
So Direct Biologics has a website. It's directbiologics.com. No fancy spelling. It's
right.
all
That's it. Directbiologics.com.
Exactly. Coming directly to you.
Good.
We have a video that goes through really beautiful video that explains how
I watched that. It is gorgeous.
Yeah, it just explains how exosomes are made and the growth factors involved in that and stuff like that. So,
and then if people want to even go further and not just learn more, but want to maybe explore treatments or therapy options for them, how can they find? Because as we talked, like not a lot of doctors are even have their head around this yet. Where can they find a doctor who could facilitate some of these treatments?
Yeah, so there's becoming more and more all over the country. That's kind of one of my roles is I'm talking to all these physicians and educating them on what it is. It's interesting because it's a challenge to educate the physician on what an exosome is. Once they understand it, like, this is great. How do I explain it to my patient? Right?
So then they're calling you. They're like, hey, Tim, I got my patient on the phone. Will you explain this to him?
Right. I thought that was just a salesman. But
You're
yeah.
going to talk to everyone in the country.
Exactly. I have enough hours, I think. But,
yeah, I hope you got a good phone call.
So the idea is that if we can educate the physicians to where they know what they're trying to achieve with it and what it can do, then it makes it a lot easier. And so it's interesting because a lot of the chiropractors, nurse practitioners, wellness clinics, naturopaths, these guys understand it and they get it, and they're just like, I'm in. I'll take the treatment first. Use it on me first, totally. That type of thing. And I'm going to inject my wife, and she's going to inject me, or whatever. I'm just like, it's kind of crazy because I've kind of came from the medical device field where it's here's a neurosurgeon, and he wants to see your level 1 peer-reviewed publications, and we're going to step through this. I might try it on one patient, or the hospital is like, well, where's your data? Where's your results? Where's your this and that? And we don't want it to come into the hospital until we have these publications. And I think there's a huge loss in the fact that, I mean, I'm all for the research and the publications and the clinical results and understanding that, but there's got to be, anecdotal evidence is not thrown out.
It shouldn't be dismissed.
Right. It's not dismissed.
Yes.
And it shouldn't be. And that's where, is there an opportunity? Does it theoretically make sense? First of all, and if you say yes, then it's okay. Now we have, several patients that have received benefit from that. Does that make sense? Yes. Okay. Now help us to get this clinical data out there. And that's why, this doing this IRB study with the Navy SEALs is going to be so important, is that, we're following these guys out for 2 years. We're hoping at 6 months to have that showing that, hey, their pain levels are down, their range of motion is up, and their opioid use is down. And that's going to be huge, but most journals aren't going to publish that because they're like, it's only 6 months. So we can hopefully get that to some conferences, start raising awareness that, hey, here's an opportunity. It's possible. 1 year, you can probably get it published with 1 year results, but that's going to probably be a lower tier journal because they're not holding the standard of you need 2 years of data before we're going to publish your data. Well, that means that, if someone's saying, I'm not going to use this until I see this publication at 2 years, it's going to be 2.5 years before we get to that point. So what are you doing to your patients before that? Are you still doing PRP? Well, what evidence is there that this is actually, there's a lot of people talk about it at conferences, and a lot of people are using it, injecting PRP into a joint, injecting PRP into a shoulder, but there's no characterization of that PRP, right? It's your blood. What is your body going through? What is your nutritional state? What is your health? And we're gonna collect your blood. We're gonna isolate your platelets out of there. We're gonna inject it into your joint. It's like, it's not as characterized as what our product is, and we're hoping it can displace a lot of that sports medicine opportunities for us. So
I tell you what, it's fascinating, and I'm highly intrigued. And I know I got a lot of buddies out there that are listening with arthritic knees or brains that they're concerned about. That are going to be calling their doctors and saying, "Hey, let me try this exosome," because I know that's when you get out of here, that's what I'll be doing.
Right.
It's like, how can I try these exosomes out? Tim Moseley, thank you so much for the time.
Yeah, it was my
Greatly
pleasure.
appreciated.
Yeah, it was really fun.
Thank you.
Yep, nice talking with you.